I wanted to ask, before we start, Arpa, about talking about oncology, let's talk a little bit, spend a little bit of time on, Moderna's core business, right? So what are your sort of expectations and assumptions looking to sort of this year and next year when you look to the core, spike back franchise, and then we can move to doublets and triplets and future combinations?
Sure. So thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. As you know, this year, our product that's commercialized is our COVID vaccine, Spikevax. I get the question quite a bit around the world around what's going to happen with COVID this year. What we're seeing around the world is most government and public health agencies are recommending an annual schedule. So every fall, when you get your flu shot, get your COVID shot. We do think last year and in the beginning of this year, there was a lot of confusion around how many shots do I need? Do I still need one? Is COVID over? What I can tell you is even just in 2022, in the United States, COVID was the third leading cause of death. So it's still here, it's here to stay. The hospitalization rates for COVID just this past fall winter season were 3 times the rates of flu. And so really, as we think about what is our COVID business this year and going forward, it's the people that come in for their flu shot should probably also get their COVID shot, right? Because it's actually a more severe potential outcome than even flu.
Perfect. And on flu, what's the status update? I know you guys have had one phase 3 study. You have a couple going on. It looks like the technology has been proven out relative to to other standards of care. So, where are you today with flu, and then how are you thinking about, the combination potentially with COVID?
Yeah. So we are excited about our flu program. Our first generation, so the way we talk about many of our products is the first generation, and then we update based on what we learn. We're hoping it could be approved as early as next year in some countries. The real advantage of our flu product is compared to traditional flu vaccines where the WHO picks a strain earlier in the year to allow manufacturers time to produce. With our technology, similar to COVID, we can actually pick a strain in June and be ready for the fall. So we're excited about customization if there are different strains in different countries. And also, oftentimes, I think 1 in every 6 or 7 years, there's a mismatch in the strain. And that's something that we can account for because we can pick the strain later. So we're hoping flu will come as early as next year. And then we are working on 2nd, 3rd, 4th generations with different antigens, different combinations even within flu. And then to your question, we're really excited about the broader combinations, so flu and COVID.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about the need for, for guidelines. We had that in the case of COVID, right, with respect to boosters and the guidance coming from regulatory authorities. What is your sense for, the flu and then the combination of flu and COVID?
Yeah. So I think it'll depend on the country.
Right.
I do think for the most part, wherever flu is recommended, authorities will be recommending COVID vaccines as well. We're seeing that in Europe, we're seeing that in Japan, we're seeing that likely in the United States as well.
And then wrapping up on the infectious disease part of it, on RSV, there's been data from a lot of other companies, GSK and Pfizer in particular, and you guys, also the mRNA platform, I think, will show some differentiation. So give us a status update about where you are with that.
Sure. So we have completed our phase 3 in RSV. We're really excited about the data. So we are the only mRNA RSV vaccine. What we're seeing from an effectiveness perspective is across different age groups, across different high-risk categories, our effectiveness is very high and consistent, which is great. From a safety perspective, we're using the same platform and technology that we use in our COVID vaccine. So we have a well-established safety and tolerability profile. We have over 1 billion doses that have been distributed over the last couple years. And then from an ease of administration, which is really important to a lot of our customers, especially pharmacists, we will be the only ready-to-use pre-filled syringe. So as I think about the RSV program, again, most of the burden of disease, at least in the adult population, is in the older adults. So we think there's also an opportunity for a triple combination that we're working on. across COVID, flu, and RSV. So for the older adults that are at high risk of all three, the real goal is in maybe 2 or 3 years, they'd be able to get 1 injection every fall instead of 2 or 3.
Right. And is that, when you think about the triple combination, is that something that could be extrapolated to other populations, you think, younger individuals, or is it mostly just older adults kind of at risk?
Yeah, so we're launching in the adults for flu and RSV. We are studying both in the younger population. It'll just take a little bit more time to get down to the ages. When you look at the burden of disease with many of these respiratory illnesses, you actually see the most complications in the very young and the very old. So we're starting older, and then we will be looking at combinations for the pediatric population as well.
Perfect. We don't take up too much time, so Paula, hand over to you for oncology.
Yeah, so this is the Oncology Day, and you all released some really exciting information in April, and since then about your oncology vaccine. And maybe just to start, if you can give the audience, for those that might not be as familiar, a little bit of an overview of what it is. Certainly we can talk about the results, and then we can drill down deeper in how it's similar and different from the infectious disease platform.
Sure. So we recently shared data at AACR and ASCO. We are developing jointly with Merck a product that we are now calling INT. So it's an individualized neoantigen therapy. What's really different about this specific cancer approach is it's one medicine for one patient. So it's truly individualized. And the way that we've developed this, this treatment is we essentially look at data from a cancer tumor. So, based on a biopsy and genetic testing that we get from an individual person, we then compare the tumor results to their regular genome, find where are the mutations that are most present in that individual person's tumor, run it through an algorithm and actually create a treatment against those specific epitopes. So it's truly an individualized treatment depending on your specific tumor within a cancer. So the data that we've released thus far is in melanoma and skin cancer. It looks fantastic. And we're really, really excited about it. What we have studied in this trial is we're comparing the combination of Keytruda and INT versus Keytruda alone. And for those of you who are in the oncology community, Keytruda is the gold standard in immunotherapy and has had phenomenal results over the last almost 8 years or so. And so to see a benefit on top of Keytruda is really, really exciting and could be game-changing.
And that benefit is 44% reduction in recurrence in stage 3-4 melanoma patients.
Exactly.
So extremely impressive. So let's talk a little bit more about that individualized manufacturing challenge, because that has been a challenge over decades that we've seen in different cell therapies and so forth. And we're talking about potentially, global release of this product. So I'd love you to first talk about the manufacturing challenge, how you're addressing that, and then we can maybe move on to the global view.
Sure. So from a manufacturing perspective, it is very different from our COVID approach. So we're not producing billions, we're producing single treatments per person. The one benefit of the mRNA platform technology is our manufacturing process is very efficient. And whether we're making a vaccine or a treatment, we're actually leveraging a lot of the same backbone engineering and processes. So as we think about manufacturing, we can actually use a manufacturing line, turn it over, and use that same line the next week for another patient. So it's very, very flexible and fast, not obviously as at the scale of a vaccine for the masses. So our real challenge, I would say, is 2 things that we're working on. One is how do we get the speed as quickly as possible from the biopsy to actually manufacturing the treatment. So we're calling it that needle to needle time. How do we get that treatment as quickly as possible to the patient? And then the second piece is how do we scale up manufacturing so that we can be producing multiple treatments for different patients at the same time. So we recently announced we are opening a manufacturing plant in Marlborough, so we're expanding in Massachusetts, and we're looking to continue to look at future global opportunities for expansion as well.
Okay. So you've also announced that you've opened or will be planning to build in Kenya and in the Philippines, more on business solutions, but actually manufacturing in Kenya. So since all of us are very concerned about health equity, maybe you can talk a little bit, and here we can talk about COVID as well as oncology and other things in your platform. You know, how do you plan to ensure health equity with these medicines?
That's a great question. Maybe starting with the COVID example, we have been committed to health equity from the beginning. I'll say as a company, our mission is to bring mRNA to have the greatest possible impact to people around the world. So for COVID, for example, we are partnering with different countries to see whether they're purchasing in the past through COVAX at a very low cost or in the future through Gavi. So we are actively in conversations to make sure that the low and middle income countries have access to our vaccines. As we scale up our therapeutic portfolio, that is certainly something that we are very keen on, is how do we get the broadest possible access. As I think about INT in the oncology portfolio, I think the biggest barriers to access, to be honest, are going to be just healthcare systems in many countries, where you don't even have the diagnosis rates or the hospitals to be able to do the biopsies to send them in to get the treatment. So I think we have a long ways to go still in many of the highly specialty care areas, but it's certainly something that we are very, very much committed to.
Great. So keeping on the oncology mode, you've started with melanoma. What's next, and how do you feel about selecting each cancer target? Where are you prioritizing? What are the key criteria? Where will it work, and where might it not work?
Great question. So we have announced that our next big trial will be in non-small cell lung cancer. So a big population around the world, and we think that we will have incremental benefit over Keytruda. We continue to assess other tumor types, so we're actually looking pretty broad to see where we think it might be scientifically valid, but also there's high unmet needs. We're looking in the advanced stages, similar to melanoma and lung cancer. But we're also now beginning to look at, is there an opportunity to expand to earlier stages of cancer? So can you actually get someone who's stage 1 or stage 2 and get them the INT treatment and prevent them from progression? One of the recent pieces of data that we just shared at ASCO that we're really excited about is in our melanoma trial, our rate of distant metastasis was significantly lower than Keytruda alone. So there was a 65% reduction in the patients actually getting distant metastases in this trial. So I think based on the distant metastasis-free survival and the relapse-free survival, we think there likely could be a pretty broad application across tumors, but also across stages.
And
so a lot to do.
And third on the list after non-small cell lung cancer?
We have not declared yet.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what else, partnerships, I think, because obviously you've entered into a lot of partnerships. So maybe talk to us about the mRNA technology and whether you always will plan or initially plan on going with a partner who maybe already has an established drug like Merck and Keytruda versus kind of doing your own protein development.
Yeah. So the Merck partnership actually started in about 2015. So the partnership's been a very long-lasting partnership when Moderna was still very, very early in the R&D stages. And that partnership started around infectious diseases. So how can we use the mRNA platform for vaccine development? We actually started, I think, in flu back then, and we were also collaborating on RSV and a few other areas that we're now seeing come to bear. And it was around that time, 2015, 2016, where Merck started seeing phenomenal data with their immunotherapy with Keytruda. And that's what really led us down this collaboration on, is there something we could do with the mRNA platform that could actually enhance immunotherapies and be effective in oncology. So the Merck partnership has been a long-lasting one that really started with infectious diseases, where Merck was the expert in vaccines. And as Merck evolved into more of the oncology expert, that's sort of how our pipeline evolved over time. So we think about other partners. We're partnering with Vertex right now to look at an inhaled version of the mRNA for smaller populations, but high unmet needs. We do always look broadly at, are there other either engineering or lipid nanoparticles or other nucleotide-based companies that would enhance our platform. But primarily, our approach has been really, really focused on mRNA or adjacent to mRNA. So we haven't really partnered into completely new areas. We think there's still a lot more that the mRNA technology can bring, and that's really where we're focusing.
Okay.
Just to follow up on that, when you think about Keytruda combinations in oncology, obviously it's PD-1's a cornerstone. Are there other mechanisms of action that you think mRNA could pair up with, across the oncology space, or even hematology as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that is the other area that we've been looking at. So we're looking across stages, we're looking across tumor types, but then we're also looking at, are there other combinations outside of PD-1s, but also monotherapy. So depending on the data and depending on the stage and the tumor, we think there might be an opportunity for a monotherapy as well.
Perfect. And just you mentioned the Vertex collaboration. Rare disease is a growing new franchise for you guys. Give us a bit of a status update there with the number of assets that you have in development. And there's a couple that are in phase 1.
Yeah. So we are actually in phase 2 for propionic acidemia. It's a rare metabolic disease for children. The data was some of the phase 2 data was just released in May, and it looks very, very promising. So what's exciting for us is we know how to get the mRNA technology now into the liver and other organs. And with this approach, we're actually replacing enzymes that are missing from these children. So the mRNA is actually giving them the code to make their own enzymes, and to actually allow these children to live healthier, longer lives, and prevent metabolic decomposition events, which are very, very life-changing and end up with very young children in hospitals. So we're super excited about the potential in this rare disease. Now that we know that it's working in the liver and in these cardiometabolic rare disease areas, we are expanding pretty quickly across a vast number of other metabolic areas as well. And I think that's one of the advantages of the platform, where you see it work in one area, your chances of it working in multiple adjacent areas is that much higher, similar to respiratory.
Perfect.
Can we talk maybe a little bit about digital? Because I think you call yourselves the digital biotech company, and we haven't mentioned that at all yet, so we should weave that into this conversation before we run out of time.
Sure. So our mindset is digital first. We're not 100% there, but that's what our goal is. I will say the first time I saw our manufacturing in Norwood, I was surprised, having seen bigger manufacturing vaccines plants at Merck and other companies. We have no paper. So just as an example, it sounds basic in this day and age, but actually you'll see in a lot of other manufacturing sites that they are not automated in the way that we are. So our manufacturing, we're investing heavily even in robotics and automation. As I think about the clinical side in R&D, there's a lot of work with AI. Obviously, even with our INT program, we're leveraging algorithms to actually predict how to create that best optimal treatment for a patient. And then on the commercial side, I can say everything that we're trying to do is digital first. So we have a very lean organization. We're looking at how do we use data to make better data-driven decisions, but then how do we use technology to actually educate patients and physicians around the world as needed. So It is certainly a mindset that is embedded throughout the company. And I think because we're so new, we can actually start with a digital approach. Whereas, you know, in other companies, you're trying to break down things that existed to go digital, which I think is a little bit harder.
I just want to go back. You talked earlier when we were talking about the melanoma product about needle to needle or vein to vein time, but you didn't say what it was and now and what you think you can get it down to.
So in the trial, there was actually a big variability in how long it took because it was also, many of the patients were enrolled during COVID. So there were a lot of confounding factors, both in terms of the patient experience because of COVID and the hospital capacity, and also because we had to dedicate so much of our manufacturing to COVID. Our goal is to get it within 30 days. So as short as possible, but I think if you asked my CEO or if you asked my head of manufacturing, that's what we're all trying to get it down to is can we get it down to less than 30 days?
And speaking of timing, regulatory timing, so obviously with the COVID pandemic, y'all made record time to get a product to market, and you've done that quite quickly relative to normal drug development timing on the melanoma product. But how do you see the government and regulatory agencies viewing each subsequent product that you're working on? Are you going to be able to keep those fast timelines, or will something else complicate that?
Yeah. So I'll say from a development perspective, we're able to keep much faster timelines than traditional vaccine development, for example. From a regulatory perspective, I think there's still a lot to be known or seen, especially in the oncology side. The data are very exciting. We have gotten PRIME designation and we've gotten accelerated sort of approval status. But we don't know how many regulators are going to require a full phase 3 before approval. So I think a lot of this depends on the data that continues to emerge and the real sort of public health interest in potentially accelerating. So we're not seeing that same level of regulatory urgency, obviously, as you see in the pandemic. But so much of this is going to be driven by emerging data.
We've talked a little bit about, you know, the core therapeutic areas for you guys. But I wanted to ask you, when you look at, you know, other, you know, sort of areas that, you know, like today, neuroscience, you know, metabolic disease, what's the potential? Has Moderna explored, you know, assets or technologies or looking at these newer fields?
Yeah. So the other field that we're currently looking at pretty actively is latent viruses. So we're in phase 3 for CMV, which is actually the #1 cause of birth defects around the world. So we're really excited about potential phase 3 program there. We're then expanding that to other latent viruses, including shingles, HPV. So there's a whole portfolio behind there. I'll say we have recently announced we're looking at other vaccine areas like Lyme disease and norovirus as well. So getting into the bacterial infections. And then last but not least, you mentioned like broader therapeutic areas. We are always looking broad. So autoimmune is a place that we're looking just based on our experience in the oncology space. And then outside of INT, we are actually looking at multiple different treatments within oncology, not just the individualized treatment. So there's a lot to come. I feel like we're just at the beginning of what mRNA is capable of. I'd say as of now, neuroscience has been a little bit harder to break. So we're still working through how do you get that technology into the brain. But of course, that is one of the largest areas of unmet need, so I'm hopeful.
And CMV, you mentioned, is in phase 3. Data 2025, 2026 kind of time frame?
Yes, most likely. We're hoping, we think the earliest approval could be in 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last minute, this year, I think you've projected $10 billion, more than $10 billion in R&D spend, which is a huge increase even over pre-pandemic times. What's Moderna putting in place to ensure that $10 billion is spent efficiently, effectively, and that translates to you're also hiring at rapid pace?
Yep. So for the pure R&D spend, just research and development, we're projecting about $4.5 billion this year. It is very large for biotech. So and this has actually been the fun part of my job, is then partnering with R&D to say, how do we prioritize the programs based on unmet needs and commercial opportunity, as well as probability of success. So there's a lot of work into how do we continue to prioritize our pipeline, how do we think about what's going to be the most valued sort of research for the communities, whether it's a combination or that next oncology program. And as we scale up and continue to hire, we do spend a lot of time at Moderna actually talking about our culture, talking about the mindsets. And one of the most important mindsets is around acting like an owner. So it's, as we spend or invest in anything, making sure that that $1 is going to that best next opportunity.
With that,
Great.
we're out of time.
Thank you so much, Arpa.
Thank you.
Thank you.